Hello and welcome to the program from the National Assembly. I am Mitaire Ikpen. The House of Representatives has concluded public hearings on the 4 tax reform bills before the National Assembly. The public hearings afforded Nigerians and quite a number of interest groups the opportunity to make their inputs into the consideration of the bills. We now bring you on the program today some of the highlights of one of the public hearings by the House Committee on Finance.
James Abiodun.
Ladies and gentlemen,
For many decades, our tax laws have remained largely unchanged. While these laws served their purpose at the time they were enacted, the economic and business landscape has evolved significantly over time. Some provisions in our existing tax laws are now outdated and no longer in tune with current economic realities. The tax laws that will be repealed by the tax reform bills when enacted are as follows. The Companies Income Tax Act 1979, the Value Added Tax Act enacted in 1993, the Personal Income Tax Act enacted also in 1993, the Income Tax Authorized Communications Act enacted in 1966, Capital Gain Tax enacted in 1967, Stamp Duties Act 1979, Casino Act 1965, Deep Offshore and Inland Basin Act in 1999, Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act in 1971, Petroleum Profit Tax Act in 1959, that was the year I was born, Venture Capital Incentives Act in 1993. Most of these acts have been amended severally over the years. Since 2019, successive finance acts have been introduced to provide quick fix amendments to some of these archaic provisions. However, these amendments have been piecemeal and have not comprehensively addressed all the issues within our tax system. Recognizing the urgency of a more holistic reform, the President inaugurated the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee with a clear mandate to overhaul and simplify the tax system. This committee worked assiduously to produce these tax reform bills, which collectively aim to create a tax structure that is fair, efficient, and effective in revenue collection. These bills are set to ensure proper tax administration while making compliance easier to taxpayers. Why the tax reform? Despite being the largest economy in Africa, Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio remains one of the lowest on the continent. In 2023, data from the International Monetary Fund showed that Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio was approximately 9.4%, compared to South Africa, which stood at 21.6%, Kenya at 14.1%, and Senegal at 19.1%. In 2023, the total tax or levies revenue collected by the federal, state, and local governments stood at 26.03 trillion. According to the Joint Tax Board, only about 35 million Nigerians pay tax, while only 9% of companies registered in Nigeria are captured in the tax net. This imbalance is unsustainable if we are to adequately fund critical infrastructure needed to build the Nigerian economy to a desirable level. Experts have estimated that Nigeria requires 3 trillion, 1.8 quadrillion over the next 30 years. That is equivalent to over $100 billion annually to bridge its infrastructure deficits. However, our RGR falls significantly short of the amount, leading the government to borrow substantially in order to bridge the funding gap. This reality highlights the urgency of implementing a tax reform that will simplify and enhance revenue collection, reduce reliance on borrowing, and drive sustainable development. Today, we will deliberate on the following bills. The Nigerian Tax Bill. The Nigerian Tax Bill seeks to repeal the current tax laws and consolidate the legal framework relating to taxation and enact the Nigerian Tax Act to provide for taxation of income, transactions, and instruments, and for related matters. This bill harmonizes all existing tax laws into a single, comprehensive, and simplified piece of legislation. By doing so, it eliminates ambiguities, ensures consistency, and provides clarity for taxpayers and tax administration alike. 2. The Nigerian Tax Administration Bill. This bill seeks to establish a clear and structured process for tax administration, creating a more transparent and efficient tax system. It covers assessment, collection, and accounting for revenue accruing to Federation, federal, state, and local government. It also prescribes the powers and functions of revenue authorities. The third bill to be considered is the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill. This bill seeks to repeal the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act and establishes the Nigerian Revenue Service. The NRS will be responsible for collecting all federal taxes, ensuring better collaboration among revenue agencies across the three tiers of government and reducing inefficiencies in tax administration. The objective of this bill is to streamline tax processes, simplify tax administration, strengthen enforcement of tax laws, and progressively reduce the cost of revenue collection. And of course, finally, the Nigerian Joint Revenue Service Bill, Joint Board Service Bill. This bill seeks to establish the Joint Revenue Board, the Tax Appeal Tribunal, and the Office of Tax Ombuds for the harmonization, coordination, promotion of the rights of taxpayers and tax dispute resolution and related matters. This board will be responsible for resolving disputes between various services, advising on tax policy matters, and proposing amendments to tax laws where necessary. Together, these four bills represent a transformative step for the Nigerian tax system by streamlining tax laws, improving administration, and enhancing revenue collection. They will set the nation on a path of sustainable economic growth while ensuring that taxpayers contribute their fair share. The legislative journey of the tax reform bills. Since the tax reform bills were transmitted to the National Assembly by the President, it has generated a lot of interest from all Nigerians as expected of any reform which deals with taxation. However, after careful study of the bills, majority of Nigerians have come to terms with the contents of the bill. Extensive stakeholder engagements have been conducted to address concerns raised by various interest groups. Now, having passed the second reading, the bill is at a crucial stage where they are open for public scrutiny and input. This public hearing serves as an opportunity for all concerned stakeholders to deliberate and propose necessary amendments to the bills to ensure the reforms achieve the intended objectives. The tax laws that we seek to reform will affect all Nigerians, both individuals and businesses operating within our economy. It is therefore imperative that we gather input from a broad range of stakeholders to ensure that these laws serve the best interests of the people. We expect contributions from all invited stakeholders who will present their views on the provisions that may require further refinement. We urge industry players, tax professionals, accountants, lawyers, the organized private sector, and economic experts to provide constructive feedback on how these bills can be improved to better achieve their intended objectives. This hearing is not just a legislative formality, it is an opportunity for us to collectively shape Nigeria's tax system for the future. We must ensure that our tax laws are practical, fair, and capable of driving economic growth while maintaining equity, fairness for taxpayers. The tax reform bills could provide us with a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a modern, efficient, and effective system for Nigeria. We must seize this moment to make the process as robust and credible as possible. As we commence the public hearing, I urge all stakeholders to actively participate and share their insights. Your contributions today are invaluable to ensure that these legislations will help shape the policies that will govern taxation in Nigeria for generations to come. Let us work together to build a tax system that supports national development while ensuring fairness for all.
Distinguished colleagues and invited guests, I have the pleasure to welcome you to this public hearing on the tax reform bills before the House of Representatives. We have invited key stakeholders, including MDAs, business leaders, tax experts and administrators, representatives from the private sector and civil society organizations to take advantage of this platform to provide useful contributions that will guide the House in the consideration and passage of the tax bills. I would like to thank the stakeholders and all Nigerians that are here for their enthusiastic response. By being here, you have demonstrated unquenchable desire and patriotic commitment towards having a tax system that best serves the greater interest of Nigerians. Let me thank the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center PLAC for providing support for this program. This 10th House recognizes the critical importance of the tax reform bills, the anxiety among Nigerians and the desire of the government to revamp our economy through an improved tax system, and resolve to ensure a thorough legislative process that is open, transparent, and inclusive. It is for this reason that we created a special committee chaired by Honorable James Faleke to oversee the legislative process. This committee includes members of the House Committee of Finance and co-opted members from the 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory. This arrangement is to ensure inclusive representation and broad-based deliberation on the proposed bills. I thank the Honorable Chairman and members of the Special Committee on the Tax Reform Bills for the good work done so far, and urge the committee to diligently drive the process to its logical conclusion. The tax reform bills under consideration include the Nigeria Tax Bill, the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. They represent critical proposals from the executive to expand Nigeria's tax base, improve compliance, and establish sustainable revenue streams for our nation's development. As you are all aware, the tax reform bills have generated widespread debate in the media, public domain, and even in private discussions, all reflecting their importance. It should be noted, however, that these debates are healthy and necessary for consolidating our democratic practice and culture. Therefore, the purpose of this public hearing is to foster robust discussions and harvest recommendations by providing stakeholders the opportunity to make their inputs. Importantly, this public hearing will help us identify areas requiring amendment, clarification, and improvement, while also considering the compatibility of these bills with the 1999 Constitution as amended and other extant laws. We have therefore set aside 3 days for the public hearing to enable as many stakeholders as possible to air their views and make their recommendations. Honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, The journey to this public hearing has been characterized by a number of critical activities in the legislative process of lawmaking. First, the House held a pre-legislative hearing on the proposed tax reform bills, on November 18, 2024. This gave us the opportunity to interact with the proponents of the bills and other tax experts and administrators. Through the interaction, the honorable members gained a comprehensive understanding of the bills and appreciated their provisions, enabling them to identify contentious and controversial areas. Subsequently, further consultations were made with members interfacing with their constituents, including state governors, all in a bid to build consensus and produce bills that align with the interests of the executive, the legislature, subnational governments, and Nigerians. The bills were then considered on the floor of the House and unanimously passed for second reading. Right from the onset of the 10th House, we identified tax reform as a key priority area in our legislative agenda because of the central role of tax in achieving sustainable economic growth and development. In every modern state, taxes are the bedrock of public revenue, providing the resources required to deliver education, healthcare, infrastructure, and security. Yet, Nigeria, despite being Africa's largest economy, struggles with a tax to GDP ratio of just 6%, which is far below the global average and the World Bank's minimum benchmark of 15% for sustainable development. This is a challenge we must address if we are to reduce our reliance on debt financing and ensure fiscal stability and secure our future as a nation. As we interact today, let me reiterate that the proposed tax reform bills aim to diversify our revenue base, promote equity, and foster an enabling environment for investment and innovation. The President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration is deliberate in the administration's tax reform programs, ostensibly to improve Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio by streamlining and broadening the tax base. However, as representatives of the people, I have continued to hold the view that we must approach these reforms thoughtfully, understanding the potential implications for every segment of society. Taxes should be fair, transparent, and justifiable, balancing the need for public revenue with the burdens they impose on individuals and businesses. The House will, therefore, scrutinize these bills thoroughly, ensuring they align with the best interests of our constituents and the nation at large. We owe this duty to Nigerians, and as the People's House, we must always accommodate the people's interests. Honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to approach this public hearing with an open but critical mind. I urge stakeholders to feel free to make insightful contributions and raise any concerns agitating their minds on these proposed bills. Together, let us seize this opportunity to bring forth a tax system that serves the best interests of all Nigerians. Let me assure the stakeholders present here and all Nigerians that the House will give deserved attention to every contribution while working assiduously to ensure the passage of the bills. As I conclude, let me use this opportunity to thank Nigerians for their support, understanding, and patience. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, there is light at the end of the tunnel. With these few remarks, it is now my pleasure to formally declare this public hearing open. We look forward to receiving the full report at plenary as soon as possible.
And this is another very important stage of the legislative process, a stage where we believe we make the document very, very rich because of the importance and the imperativeness of the input that we expect from the general public. So we thank everybody that has taken time to be here this afternoon. The numbers here confirm the importance attached to these bills. And we hope that we'll have a very, very interactive session. A lot of submissions have been made. We hope to make this session very, very interactive. We assure the general public that the report that the committee will lay and that will be considered in the House will reflect the opinions that will be shared by the general public. So on behalf of the House and the leadership of this committee, we want to thank everybody that has taken time to be a part of this epoch-making public hearing.
The first issue I would like to raise is with regards to the Nigerian tax bill itself. Specifically, I want to talk about the section to do with value-added tax. We fully support a lot of the things that are contained in that bill, but specifically, we want to mention that it will be of great benefit for this committee to consider making exports from Nigeria to be zero-rated. That way, exporters from Nigeria will be competitive globally. An allied issue I would like to talk about is the fact that we will also like to mention that, and this is tied to the section to do with the Stamp Duty Act, we are of the view that agreements, contracts that are already subject to the value-added tax rules should not be subject to ad valorem value-added tax. Sorry, stamp duty, I mean. I think that is the other aspect I would like to talk about. In a way, it creates a form of double taxation if this area is not looked into. Mr. Chairman, we also would like to advocate with regards to the currently subsisting executive orders. And our view on it is simple. Most of the executive orders are tied to laws that will be repealed by the time the current bill is passed into law. Our view, which we seek for this committee to take into account, is to ensure that the provisions in those executive orders are fully reflected in the Nigerian tax bill. That way, it will take away all forms of ambiguity, and it will also not create a situation where investors' confidence in the country is in any way dampened. Mr. Chairman, the next area we want to talk about is still on the Nigerian tax bill, is with regards to the deferral of claim of capital allowance. And our advocacy is very simple. That will be paragraph 21, subparagraph 1 of the first schedule of the Nigerian tax bill. Our advocacy point is very simple and straightforward. We would like the bill as currently drafted to give full powers to taxpayers to be able to determine how they claim capital allowances. Doing so will not in any way shortchange the government, but rather it will create a situation where the government is able to receive in good time taxes that are due. So that advocacy point is what it is. Mr. Chairman, last but not the least, we will also like to draw your attention to the fact that by the time the Nigerian tax bill is passed into law, the Company Income Tax Act, among several other acts, will immediately be repealed. Mr. Chairman, I would like to draw your attention to Section 23, subsection 1K of the Company Income Tax Act, and to mention that this particular provision has not been reflected in the Nigerian tax bill. And this provision essentially is one that will truly benefit the Nigerian state. It's a provision that sort of grants tax waiver to companies that bring in income they've earned abroad. Income types such as royalty, interest, and dividend. At this critical time of our economy, when we need foreign exchange inflow, should not be the time such a critical provision that encourages taxpayers to bring in foreign currency they earn abroad to be taken out of the proposed bill.
Now, the time of our resolution to properly address. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Crime Center for Citizens Empowerment and Development.
The certificate of acceptance of new or additional investment value should remain a statutory requirement for the computation of capital allowance and should be included in the first schedule, line 18 of the bill, that is HB 1759, page C 4843 of the bill. Then the second prayer we are seeking or asking for is that the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment should be responsible for supervising the processing of the Economic Development Incentive Certificate through the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission and IPC. On page C4966, line 5 of the bill. Then finally, in the Annex 5 of the bill, Nigerian tax bill, where the phrase, we want this aspect I'm going to mention now to be captured, that the phrase relevant authority should be clearly stated as the Industrial Inspectorate Department of the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment for certifying the production day. This is found on page C4937, line 20 of the bill.
Are convinced that the bills, when passed and signed into law, will strengthen the macroeconomic stability of our nation. These laws will definitely improve on the objectives as set out in Section 16 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. Our Commission have found no objection whatsoever with the four bills because they are in tandem with the spirit and intent of Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. We have found these bills that will strengthen modernization and harmonization of all the tax heads, which are well over 49 and being merged into about 10 laws, if eventually passed. It will make for easier operation of the tax system and will make collection a lot easier. It will also support small businesses. We also find it that it will also support the low-income earners, which will reduce poverty we have, sorry, however, we have some observations. We have some observations in the area of conflict with Fiscal Responsibility Act number 31 of 2007. We refer particularly on the Joint Revenue Board Bill 583. Our observation, sir, is that it's in line with timeline. The timelines given in some of the provisions will contradict and will not help for easy management of the fiscal policies of the government. One, Section 18.1 of the bill. The bill I'm referring here is the Joint Revenue Board Bill. The board shall not later than 30th September in each year submit to the minister a report of its activities during the preceding year, and shall include in such report the audited accounts of the board. This is underlined for emphasis. The Commission proposes an adjustment to the timeline contained in the said section to read not later than 30th April in each succeeding financial year. This amendment will make the report to be submitted in good time to enable the Honorable Minister to include same in the report required under Section 49(1) of FRA 2007, which provides that the federal government shall publish its audited financial statement not later than 6 months following the end of each fiscal year. The second observation is on the Revenue Service Establishment Bill. Section 24 of the proposed bill provides that the service shall not later than 30th September in each year submit an estimate of income and expenditure for the succeeding year for the purpose of appropriation to the National Assembly. For the purpose of avoiding conflict that may arise in future, sir, it's our considered opinion that it's important that this submission is made not later than August, 30th of August of each succeeding year, in order to align with Section 21, Sub 1 and 2 of FRA, which clearly provides and is critical that the government, corporation, and the agencies of government listed in the schedule to this Act shall not later than 6 months from the commencement of this Act and for every 3 financial year thereafter of each second year, cost to be prepared and submitted to the minister their scheduled estimates of revenue and expenditure for the next 3 years. So what we are talking here is to make for planning so that the National Assembly can get this.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment agrees, of course, completely with the tax reform bills, but has observations, particularly on the Nigerian Tax Bill 2024, on 2 areas. And these 2 areas apply to both mandates that are presently prevalent in the ministry: the mandate on industry and the mandate on trade and investment. In section 1982 and 3, I'd like to call attention to the fact that the Export Processing Zones Associations organized a conference in Lagos last week. The Minister of Trade and Investment was present, and it was a very chaotic meeting. And all of that has to do with the reactions and the commentaries on section 1982 and 3, section 57, and some particular clauses in the second schedule. the hope of the ministry is that these associations working with the Federal Inland Revenue Service will be able to find a common ground, and the committee will assist in harmonizing this, because there are issues of tax exemptions and tax incentives that are implicated in these sections. And it is important that Nigeria's industrial environment and growth is not affected by what law comes out. The second deals directly with industry. And I think that sitting here, I've listened to quite a number of interventions having to do with the first schedule, line 8 of the Nigerian tax bill. And all of that concerns CAFA, the Certificate of Acceptance of Fixed Assets. And the concern of the ministry is simple, is on emphasizing the significance of this certificate for new and additional investments in granting capital allowance, and to seek the indulgence of the committee that this be captured. The Industrial Development Department has in it engineers and experts in physical sciences that are best positioned to do physical examination of these new investments in order that there's no reliance completely on receipts, invoices, and co. It is the hope of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment that the committee would be able to respond to these two issues in order to allow the ministry to remain competitive both in supervising and monitoring industrial growth and development, and in encouraging manufacturers, those who want to invest in our country, not to be adversely affected. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mr. Uche Rees. On behalf of the retired industrial inspectors of the Industrial Inspectorate Department of Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, wish to make this presentation. We are retired though, but we have experience over 30 years in carrying out fiscal inspection of companies on capital undertakings that qualify for certificate of acceptance and capital allowances. In view of the proposed amendment of the Nigerian tax bill, especially section 1759, and as an interested stakeholder, we wish to express our deep concern over the exclusion of the Industrial Inspectorate Department from the proposed bill. The physical inspection of companies' assets entrusted to the Industrial Inspectorate Department before the issuance of certificate of acceptance in order to validate the capital allowance is based on the following reasons and procedures, among others. To confirm the existence of these assets, for example, the plants, machinery, equipment, furniture and fittings, computer softwares, office equipment, vehicles, shipping vessels, aircrafts, among others, to evaluate the physical conditions, operational status, and most importantly, the fair market value of the assets, to prevent overstatement or misrepresentation of the assets in the financial statements or asset registers submitted to the FIRS, to ensure that the physical assets are in use by the company for the year under claim. Ownership verification, to confirm ownership or resolve disputes about leased, financed, or pledged machinery. Reconcile the physical structures as buildings, fences, roads, etc., with the drawing details. Our request, therefore, the House Committee on Finance is kindly requested to consider and reinstate the mandates and operations of the Industrial Inspectorate Department as outlined in the Industrial Inspectorate Act 18 of Law Federation of Nigeria 2004.
They should be put on record that the government and people of Kano are in support of reforms. And in particular, we are in support of fiscal reforms that would expand the fiscal space in this country and that would engender efficiency in the operation of the fiscal system. We think that it's unrealistic to expect Nigeria to survive on revenues that are barely 10% of our GDP. We know that we are doing much less than what other economies are doing, the sub-Saharan Africa. We are doing much less than, we are doing worse than countries like South Africa and Rwanda and Ghana and so on. And therefore it is important, it's imperative that we reform the fiscal system. We think that the tax system in this country is complex and cumbersome, that in spite of past reforms that we have had, that is still, administration is still weak, is riddled with inefficiency and corruption and poor governance and so on and so forth. So we are in support of the federal government for initiating the tax reforms. Having said that, Mr. Chairman, we are also saying that the House of Representatives and the Senate have a responsibility to ensure that this is handled judiciously and responsibly, that whatever tax system we propose, whatever fiscal system we propose, is based on three key principles of justice, of fairness, and equity. That it is the responsibility of the House to ensure that when you pass this bill, you do not put additional burden on the citizens of this country, that it is important that you do not exacerbate the uneven development of federating units. It is important to bear this in mind, and this comment applies to all the bills that you are likely to pass. Mr. Chairman, there are specific recommendations that we make. With regards to the Nigerian tax bill, we think that the review and harmonization of multiple taxes in this country is welcome, is overdue. We think that harmonization would enhance clarity, it will enhance compliance, and also engender efficiency and legislative coherence. So this is excellent. Number two, the review of incentives is also welcome because it will address issues of effectiveness. We think that there are lots of there are issues of effectiveness and efficiency and governance in the administration of incentives in this country, so it's welcome. We welcome the provisions for progressive taxation. We think that this is also long overdue to do so. So then we go to other specific recommendations. With regards to VAT, I'm sure lots of people will be interested in this one. We do not think that we should contemplate any increases in VAT rates at this time. We think that there is a need for the government to expand the fiscal space, but when inflation is at 34% and VAT is a consumption tax, we do not think that this is the right time for us to contemplate increasing the VAT rates. We think there is room for improvement in collection efficiency. We understand that collection efficiency is less than 40% as far as VAT is concerned. We think that there's a room for that, and we know that the tax system is responsive to such policy changes. So I think the initial focus should be on improving efficiency, coverage, and efficiency. With regards to the distribution formula, we think that these three principles are good, They are excellent. Population, equality, and derivation. If you apply them judiciously and responsibly, I think they will address our concerns for efficiency, for justice and fairness and equity. However, I think we also have to be aware of the difficulties the committee has in defining, in interpreting what derivation is. So what are we recommending? We are saying that the current framework in the Act, not in the bills, the current framework in the Act, which provides for a horizontal distribution of 15% to the federal government, 50% to the states, and 35% to the local government, should be retained for a transitional period of 2 years, within which we'll be able to get sufficient data that will justify the derivation principle. For the vertical formula, we are saying that what obtains in the Act, population 30%, equality 50%, and derivation 20%, should also be retained for a transitional period of 2 years. I mean, that can be negotiated maybe 2 years or 1 year, but it's for us to be able to understand exactly what data we use in having the derivation principles. We are of the view that you have laws to strengthen institutions, not to destroy them. And therefore, the provision that these 3 institutions of government would cease to access funds should be reconsidered. In other words, TED Fund and NITA and the SENI should continue to access the development levy, and that their fund should be a beneficiary of the current 4% development levy. Finally, Mr. Chairman, in line with the section 162, subsection 2 of the Constitution, we think that RAMFAD should be allowed to exercise its mandate in proposing what the formula should be. I know the controversy between the committee and RAMFA, whether they have the responsibility to do that. I think government should not attempt overtly or covertly to undermine its institutions. That this is something that you don't have to debate that in public. I think the committee and the institutions, RAMFA, should be able to come to terms with those. We thank you very much for the opportunity again, and we hope that we are going to arrive at something that is good for the generality of Nigeria.
Our interest in this public hearings on the tax bill 2024, I will pay special attention to clause 58 and the fourth schedule of the bill, which we as advocates of the poor masses, the tax bill, the Nigerian tax bill 2024. So we as the advocates of the masses of Nigeria are in support of Mr. President that Nigerians who earn less than 1 million naira or companies that earn less than 5 million naira annually should be exempted from taxation. And also an overview as Nigerians, if we don't administer the revenues collected from tax properly, it will scare foreign direct investments in Nigeria. That's why we're also in support of the management of taxes collected at all levels of government for health, education, and infrastructure. We're also in support of the position of Mr. President on the distribution of VAT, which some people are scared of going explicitly to talk about it here. That we are in support of 60% on derivation, 20% on equality, and 20% on population. Reason being that we want to encourage Nigerians to work hard to develop their states respectively, generate more revenue, and see that this country is developed across board, everywhere, north, south, east, and west. We don't want to encourage our children to be, lazy, where they will not develop the solid minerals and whatever they have in their states to see that more taxes are generated and the states are developed very fast. So this is our position with Mr. President, and therefore we are not in tandem with the Governors Forum, which wants to encourage money to be collected from certain sectors of the economy and then shared to other parts of the country. No. We want to be very clear about this, that the more you generate revenue, the more you get from the VAT sharing formula, and the more you develop your place. And whatever you have that's lying on the ground, please start exploration, make contacts, and begin to develop your states, generate more revenue, get more allocation, and then spend it. So we don't want to bore this committee too much with a lot of words, but having made these statements, we want to be clear that we are in support of the position of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on the tax reform bill, that this bill should be implemented as proposed.
We want to be on record that ICANN is in full support with all the provisions in the tax reform bills. Specifically, we want to lay credence to Section 32 of Nigerian Tax Administration Bill on accreditation of tax agents by relevant tax authorities. We are fully in support of it, as it is well aligned with the international best practice. I can give 10 countries that are using this model, whereby tax agents are being regulated by the tax authorities. The relevant professional bodies should concentrate on setting standards and examining will-be professionals.
I would want to speak more specifically to the aspect of the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill, which incidentally was discussed just here, Section 32, and also the interpretation of the Joint Revenue Board Nigeria Establishment Bill, the interpretation on Section 143. And the simple thing we are observing there, by virtue of the definition of tax agents, is that it could actually lead to issues. We want a situation whereby, tax practice as it is not just left to every or any professional body, but to be strictly regulated, more so that the act establishing the CITN has been there since 1992, and we feel that if we are allowed to professionalize in our various fields, it will be an added advantage to us, rather than to allow a situation where the interpretation in Section 143 suggests that any other professional body could actually come in and be approved as a tax agent. And we feel, so in that light, in our suggestion, there's a table, just 2 pages, in which we have highlighted the observation and also suggested how it should be interpreted. That it shouldn't just be any professional body, but the tax professional body relevant for that. I would just want to emphasize, yes, indeed, we're talking about global practices. And indeed, there are countries that are regulating taxation in other countries. But let's not forget that we equally have countries that are indeed having tax professional bodies, and they are doing very well. Even some of the countries cited here, not quite long, you would find out that the relevant tax authorities that are actually bringing in or accrediting these agents in those relevant tax authorities, they still insist that as an accountant, for instance, in the United States, you still need to pass through some training, specifically on taxation, because of how sensitive it is, before you can become an agent in such a place. But I think we have specifically, even from the ones listed, some of the companies like, CIOT in the UK, there is a professional body, the Chartered Institute of Taxation UK. We also have the Institute of Taxation Ireland. The Canada Institute of Taxation still exists, and of course the Institute of Certified Tax Professionals in South Africa. All these ones, including our near country here, Ghana and others, we are of the opinion that we should please be more allowed to specialize. Today, we are having students and we are having universities that are indeed, offering taxation courses. And I think it is encouraging that we allow us to thrive and to progress. I just wanted to emphasize on this one point. The rest of the narratives will be are already narrated in just 2 pages, which we will go through on all areas that we have offered contributions. And I must state clearly that the Institute stands by these very bills. We are in support, except for this observation that we want you people to please look into.
I am here with the contribution by the Association of Nigerian Taxation Students on the proposed tax reform bill. The executive summary of our contribution. The Association of Nigerian Taxation Students is a conglomerate of students from various tax clubs and tax associations across the country, established in the year 2022, and thus aims to promote tax knowledge, advocacy, and compliance. The Association of Nigerian Taxation Students is committed to upholding the highest standard of professionalism and integrity in the tax profession. Issues and recommendations by the Association of Nigerian Taxation Students. Firstly, the appointment of tax agents. As students of taxation, we recognize taxation to be a specialized profession that requires expertise and professionalism. The National University Commission and the National Board of Technical Education have approved the study of taxation as a course in Nigeria in over 30 tertiary institutions, offering programs in the national diploma, higher national diploma, bachelor's degree, and even to PhD levels. This recognition underscores the importance of taxation as a distinct field that requires specialized knowledge and skills. Section 32 of the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill 2024 provides the accreditation of tax agent. Specifically, it states, for the purpose of compliance with this act or any other law, a taxpayer may either represent itself or be represented by a tax agent accredited by the relevant tax authority. Secondly, the requirement for accreditation shall be set out by the relevant tax authority. Thirdly, no return shall be deemed as duly filed except filed by the taxpayer or an accredited agent.
As a stakeholder, we, however, expressed some concerns in the documents that we have sent. It's a 17-page document. I will make reference to some few sections where we observed jurisdictional conflicts between the provisions of the Joint Revenue Board Bill, Section 23 and 29 of the bill, and Section 41A of the Joint Revenue Bill. Basically, these are jurisdictional conflict issues. In the Nigerian Revenue Service Established Bill, Section 1 seeks to completely legislate Nigeria Customs Service out of existence, if you pardon my words. So we raised our objection, our observation also on Section 4S. And in Section 4S, this is also another omnibus provision. This particular provision gives the proposed NRS oversight functions over all taxes and levies. And as observed by the distinguished professor earlier, we are worried that this new law is seeking to override all previous laws that were done to address issues regarding the economy. I think it's also important, as we try to do on page 5 of the, or page 4 of the document, that the substitution of the word tax, the substitution of the word duty by tax in very many areas of the bill seems to overlook the difference and the objective which these two tools can do in an economy. Our understanding is that tax is used to generate revenue for government, and it's also used to distribute wealth. However, duty goes beyond that. Duty is more of a fiscal policy tool, an instrument by government to encourage industrialization, to discourage environmental pollution, and to put in some kind of public health order. In subsequent parts of the paper, we went on to identify the professional nature of We went on to identify the professional nature of the customs calling, which we believe are not related in any way to either general taxation or specific taxation. And these are the areas of HS classification, in the areas of valuation, and the areas of rules of origin. Because one of the objectives of this legislation is to bring us in tandem with global best practice. The paper that we submitted highlighted lessons that we have learned from many countries that have walked this route. And we picked out the World Customs Organization, for example. The data that we have from the World Customs Organization indicated that 179 out of 185 countries separate customs functions from tax revenue functions. But we went beyond that. We consulted studies that was done by OECD. There were a number of case studies that were published, and we attached this in the reference. And permit me to just read a particular case. While the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2022 reports on tax and customs administration integration initially appeared to support integration models, there are more recent and refined study, which was done in 2023, just about 2 years ago, reached substantially different conclusions. In this updated research, it was specifically acknowledged that the previous assessments which the research did may have overemphasized short-term revenue gains at the expense of long-term trade facilitation and security outcomes. The rest of the findings of this particular OECD studies is as attached or is as indicated on page 9. Other institutions, development partners, like the World Bank and the IMF, in some of their studies, they've also made some reversals in their previous submission. And let me take, for example, the case of the World Bank publication in 2023, where they made an analysis of customs autonomy and performance. These comprehensive studies examined 52 countries over a 15-year period and found that nations maintaining autonomous customs administrations demonstrated 31% higher rate of trade facilitation, and they scored 24% better revenue compliance than those with integrated administrations, which this bill seeks to propose. And the research specifically noted that specialized customs functions, including valuation, classification, and origin determination, shows measurable deterioration following integration with general tax authorities. So once you integrate them, these specialized areas will suffer. Let me give the last example from the United Kingdom. UK's case was mentioned by one of the previous speakers, but it was only mentioned in part. And I want to read for us the UK's experience with integrating Her Majesty's Customs and Excise into Her Majesty's Revenue Customs in 2005 is very, very instructive. According to a comprehensive review by the Institute for Government, which was done in 2012, This merger was described as meeting the terrier with the retriever due to fundamentally different operational culture and functions. Despite initial efficiency promises, the UK ultimately reversed course, separating border control functions and creating a dedicated UK border agency, thereby acknowledging the special nature of customs operations. This is quoted from House of Commons Affairs Committee, that's the Parliament of UK, the work of the UK Border Agency, and it was published in 2012. Of course, there are so many instances that we've had in Africa, and some of them are instructive. Uganda went this route by trying to integrate customs and tax authorities. The initial result was an increase of between 7 to 10% in tax to GDP ratio. And this data is provided by the IMF. However, according to the World Bank East African Customs Revenue Project Assessment, which was done recently in 2020, these gains proved unsustainable as operational complexities emerged and corruption challenges resurfaced, with clearance time increasing by 27% between 2000 and 2005. So there are other examples provided in the paper from Tanzania and from Ghana. On the flip side of this, the paper also indicated some African countries where deliberate attempts were made to modernize customs, And these examples are in Morocco, in South Korea, and these are leading customs administrations in the world. Morocco's customs modernization program increased revenue by 37% over the first 5 years, while reducing clearance time by 65%, according to the World Customs Organization Modernization Handbook. So what was done in Morocco, sir, I'm running up, is what the parliament in Nigeria undertook in 2023 by enacting the Nigeria Customs Service Act. And less than 2 years in the implementation of this act, the report and the result that we have in Nigeria is even better than Morocco's, because revenue has increased by over 92%, trade facilitation has improved as evidenced from our stakeholders. We are using technology to lead our fight against anti-smuggling. We therefore made some recommendations. And the principal recommendation we made was that we should encourage collaboration, integration of operations between customs and the tax authority, not to abolish customs or not to repeal a law because we want to do another law.
Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission is 100% in support of this bill. These bills, if this is what it will take to take Nigeria out of the present situation we are in. Our revenues are too low. Our laws are archaic. And I think this is a very bold move by Mr. President. And I'm sure the National Assembly will do justice to this bill. The only observation after vigorous discussion that the Commission had was during a discussion with the Senate Committee of Elders, with Professor Tayo, the FRS chairman, and myself. We discussed some gray areas, and Professor Tayo promised that they will look at it and get back to you. And there are also another engagement with the Governors Forum on the issue of VAT and VAT distribution. There was an agreement with the Governors Forum, myself, Professor Tayo, and FRS chairman. So Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission takes this position. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Chairman, sir, the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria have identified 4 key concerns with the bill. Number 1, gradual increment of VAT from the current 7.5% to 15%. Mr. Chairman and respected members, the TUC rejects the gradual increment of VAT from 7.5% to 15%. Our reason is simple. Allowing the value-added tax VAT rate to remain at 7.5% is in the best interest of the nation, as increasing it will place additional burden on Nigerians, many of whom are already struggling with the economic challenges and realities. At a time when inflation is on the rise, unemployment is on the rise, higher taxes will further strain households and businesses, which eventually might slow down the economy. So we are strongly of the opinion that VAT should remain at 7.5%, Mr. Chairman. Secondly, we propose an increase in tax exemption brackets to 2.5 million, Mr. Chairman, per annum. The threshold for tax exemption should be increased from the current 800,000 per annum as proposed in the bill to 2.5 million per annum. This, in our opinion, Your Excellencies, will provide relief for struggling Nigerians within that income bracket, easing the economic realities they face and increasing their disposable income. Mr. Chairman, our third concern is on TETFON and NASENI, which is billed to be scrapped and defunded. The Trade Union Congress of Nigeria is of the opinion that both TETFON and NASENI should remain a going concern, as these institutions have greatly impacted the country through their respective mandates. Both have respectively been instrumental in improving our tertiary education and adopting a homegrown technologies to enhance national productivity and self-reliance. Their continued existence, Mr. Chairman, is vital for sustaining progress in education, technology, and economic development across the length and breadth of this country. Mr. Chairman, the law setting up these institutions can be re-examined to make it more transparent and repositioned for optimal performance. On a final note, Mr. Chairman, our fourth concern is the Nigerian Revenue Service taking over the role of NUPRC in the collection of royalties and other revenues in the oil and gas sector. Our affiliate, Pengason, have already submitted a position paper on this, and the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria aligns fully with the position of Pengason. We thank you most sincerely for this opportunity to present the concern of Nigerian workers.
Mr. Chairman, sir, the Supreme Council for Sharia in Nigeria aligns itself to the ongoing effort of the government to reform our tax system. We're indeed very, very in support of this effort, and we consider this timely. Nevertheless, Mr. Chairman, the Council has some concerns that it wants to present together with some recommendations for the consideration of the honorable members of this committee. I would like to start with the Nigeria Tax Bill, NTB. Under it, we have about 4 concerns. Number 1 is on VAT rates and returns. It is the considered opinion of the Council that VAT rates should be reduced back to 5%, or in worst case scenario, maintain the present 7.5%. This is in view of the current economic realities in Nigeria. On the basis of this, Mr. Chairman, The Council suggests that Section 146 of the Nigeria Tax Bill 2024 should read that, subject to the provisions of Part 4 of Chapter 8 of this Act, VAT shall be charged at 5% or 7.5% if necessary. 2, we are proposing a deletion to Section 154, subsection 4, that requires persons whose supplies are chargeable to VAT at 0% shall pay VAT on taxable supplies consumed in the production of its supplies, and may thereafter request for a refund of the tax of the VAT paid. We are making this recommendation in view of the fact that we know in Nigeria it is practically impossible or near impossible for people to be able to reclaim or seek refund of the VAT already paid. Any money that goes into the coffers of the government, we know it's a tug of war for it to come out. And more so that the people of Nigeria largely do not have that knowledge of going forth and backward to get what is due to them in the name of refund. Next is list of VAT exempted items. We are suggesting that Section 190 of the Nigeria Tax Bill should return all VAT exempted items listed in Finance Act 2020. In addition to all the items listed, we are proposing that all the items found or included in the Finance Act 2020 should also be added to the list of items included in Section 190 of the Nigeria Tax Bill.
What's your own proposal?
We as a committee that is based here in FCT, as an umbrella body of all the imams in FCT, we've been following up all that is happening on these tax reform bills. And we are so in support of all that is going on. Only that we have some observations on 2 bills, tax reform bills and tax administration bills. On Nigeria tax bill, we have 4 areas where we have some observations and we wish to recommend as follows. Number 1, supremacy clause and the potential constitutional conflict on Nigeria tax bill. Section 202 of the Nigeria tax bill asserts its supremacy over the laws related to taxation in the country. However, this provision contradicts Section 1, subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. To resolve this conflict, we recommend deleting or amending Section 202 to align with the Constitution. Number 2 of our observations, sir, potential reintroduction of inheritance tax, as earlier already positioned by the earlier speaker, that is Professor Dogarawa. That is Section 4, subsection 3 of the NTB, raises concern about the potential reintroduction of inheritance tax, which was abolished in 1996. To avoid this, we recommend expunging Section 4, subsection 3, or adding a clarifying clause to that. 3, value-added tax rate increase and revenue distribution. The proposed VAT rate increase from 7.5% to 15% over 6 years, sir, as provided in Section 146 of the NTB, may lead to higher living costs of the citizens. We therefore wish to suggest and recommend that instead of increasing it to even 15%, let the current one be reduced to 5% to make life easier for our citizens. 4, development level and its potential negative impact on tertiary education. Section 59 of the NTB proposes a development levy on the assessable profits of all companies chargeable to tax. The revenue accruing from this levy will be distributed among TED Fund, NITDA, NASENI, and the Student Education Loan Fund. The proposed distribution formula may have far-reaching implications for tertiary education in Nigeria. We therefore humbly recommend that the chapter on development levy, specifically Section 59, subsection 1 to 5, be expunged and the status quo be maintained.
I wish to put forward a strong observation and seek to express our deep concern over the exclusion of Industrial Inspectorate Department, ID, of Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment on its core mandate from the proposed tax bill, Bill number HB 1759. The precise aspect of this Nigerian tax bill that we are concerned about is the capital allowance and its processes. From pages 64843 down to 64980 of the proposed bill. Relevance of Industrial Inspectorate Department with respect to Certificate of Acceptance for Fixed Asset, CAFA. We all know the importance of capital allowance on tax computation and the usual process of getting tax capital allowance and its relevance of the Inspectorate Department in all that process. However, with the new bill, it's almost a whole new approach, with the Industrial Inspectorate Department being absolutely excluded. Let me quickly remind us all of a few of the essential statutory responsibilities of that department. 1, verifying and investigating qualifying capital expenditure, CE, incurred by companies. 2, issuing the certificate of acceptance and new stroke additional investment value, which is normally mandatory in the computation of capital allowance. 3, generating revenue for government through its activities by way of application fee and collection of the certificate of acceptance for new investment. 4, also the department, during the physical inspection of capital expenditure, generate processes and store some vital technical data on process plants, machineries, and industrial infrastructure. This database is usually utilized by the Ministry for Industrial Policy Formulation. The database is also utilized by many organizations and international development partners. Our argument. As the saying goes, you can't be a judge in your own matter. FRS cannot be tax administration and cannot be verifier of genuineness of documents brought by taxpayer, especially when it concerns determination of tax liability. If someone wants to claim capital allowance using purchase invoice, I want to take that again. If someone wants to claim capital allowance, using purchase invoice is not enough to genuinely establish the existence of such assets. It is when an asset is being put to use that the taxpayer is qualified to claim allowances on such qualifying assets. If there is no regulatory body checkmating that claims, taxpayers will easily manufacture invoices to claim allowances to reduce tax liabilities. Hence, the IID should be allowed and further equipped to carry out compliance and verifications.
And those were some of the highlights of one of the public hearings organized by the House Committee on Finance on the 4 tax reform bills. The House Committee on Finance is expected to submit its reports, which will be considered at plenary. And that brings us to the end of the program for today. Do join us again for another episode of the program from the National Assembly. I am Itaire Ikwen. Bye for now.